Yeah, so good afternoon and welcome everyone. I hope everybody can hear me properly. I would like to welcome everyone who has joined this webinar, taking out time from their busy schedule, especially in these times right in the middle of the day, where the entire working modalities have changed. We are all working from home, and I really appreciate people taking out time to attend this webinar and have a discussion along with us on this topic today. I hope everyone along with their family, friends are doing well in this, pandemic scenario. And today what we are going to speak about is cyber resiliency for data security needs. I will be the host and moderator for this webinar. My name is Murtaza Bhatia. I head the vertical solutions team in NTT India. Along with me, I have four distinguished panelists who will discuss this entire cyber resiliency for data security need for next 45 minutes or so. And I would just want to introduce them. We have Devanathan Balaji, who is the principal consultant for cybersecurity solutions in NTT India. Devak?
Hi everyone.
Yeah. And then we have Subramania Mayer, who heads the national sales for Titus.
Hi everyone, very good afternoon.
Yeah, and along with Subbu, we have Vamsi Ponikanti, the head of technical sales from McAfee.
Thanks, Murtaza. Hi everyone, pleased to be here this afternoon.
And we have Hirdejit Singh, senior director and heads pre-sales from Seclore.
Hello and good afternoon, everyone.
So thanks, to all the panelists who are taking this time out and joining us in this discussion. We have, in around about 45 minutes to discuss the subject that we are talking about, data security resiliency. Then we will open up for questions. In the meantime, I would, urge the participants to share the questions on the chat window, and we will try to answer them through the panelists that we have. So I'll just take 1 minute. Can we just move the slide on? Yeah, so I'll just take 1 minute in setting up the context of this discussion, right? In this time, we see that digital transformation has become inevitable. Everybody wants to adopt or move towards digital means of doing things. We are in a situation currently where entire globe is in the lockdown state, and business means of doing business and ways and means of doing business is changing. So the entire infrastructure and the access to the infrastructure is moving around cloud and working from home. So there is a change in the entire infrastructure that is happening, that we have seen. Data is moving out of the boundaries of the organization. How can we protect that data is the question that we get in discussions with every organizations and every CIO that we interact with. How well the current security investment can be optimized to dynamically adopt the changing environment is the question. And the data being used, is it used by the authorized person when it is moving out of the organization? A check has to be required. So all these security challenges that we see warrants us or questions, put a questions in front of us, that how do we help, how do we protect this and make the business the required data available so that the business continues as it was continuing in the normalcy situation. And this is not going to end. We see that unlock 1.0 and 2.0 has been initiated, and the response curve has moved toward the recovery curve now. We slowly businesses are trying to come back online, and in a form which was not exactly same as earlier, and data still needs to go out, still needs to exchange. The methods of working along in the business, interaction within the business and outside the business is happening, and how do we control? So for that, I think we want to have this discussion run through our esteemed panelists, and to secure it end to end, right from the end user laptop or a client accessing this data over the internet to the service and the server delivering those services. How do we ensure that the data is protected at each layer, and what solution is required to protect these data at each layer? And over and above that, I just want to also understand that how we are managing and operating by consolidating and integrating this solution, different solutions to protect data at different layer into a single platform. And that is the question that we are looking for an answer in this webinar. And I would now welcome Devanathan Balaji to take it over from here and start the conversation.
Thanks, Murtaza. Hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Can you move to the next slide, please? Yeah. When it comes to the cybersecurity market, you have n number of products covering various areas. If you look at data protection, you have 10 vendors. If you look at data privacy, you'll have 10 vendors. And on top of that, you will have for the rights management, multiple vendors. All these are point products, and we end up into working on a silos. So what we are trying to do in this particular data protection solution is how we can look at a holistic approach, combining various solutions, and how NTT can help you in that. So based on those various vendors, NTT has built a solution based on the McAfee platform, the Titus platform, and the Seclore platform, which will be integrated. So we'll just look into that, how the entire solution will work in helping you move towards a protected data infrastructure. Can you go to next slide, please? What NTT typically does is we have our engagement model starts with a consulting, where we understand what is the gap on the existing infrastructure, try to build a strategy and create a roadmap. And once the roadmap is created, we get into the architecture, where the architecture is based on the secure by design framework. Once the architecture is built, we also go and implement them. When we say implement them, we have various solutions, multiple OEM. The primary challenge which most of the client face is in terms of integrating the various solutions together. Once the integration is done, we also do the management part. So in this particular couple of hours or 45 minutes, we are going to talk about how this integration story is going to work and how it gives you the needed protection. Can you go to the next slide? When it comes to data protection, data has to be looked at in a holistic manner. The first challenge what we face is in terms of visibility of a data. Data is stored multiple areas. We don't have where the data is stored. That's a primary challenge which every client faces. Once we are able to identify some mechanism through some mechanism where the data is there, the second challenge comes at is how do I enforce a way wherein the data, when it gets created, is getting classified, and whether that classification is as per the organization policy. These are some of the challenges which the data classification solution addresses. Once we are able to identify the data classification, the second mechanism comes up in terms of how do I protect it. The various typical areas where the data can be given out, going outside will be through your web, email, and endpoint. With the adoption of cloud and various SaaS services, the movement of data is spread across multiple locations. So the solution for the protection of data needs to consider that the data can be flown in various weather. While we do n number of controls to protect the data, it is equally important that we need to send out data to the needed person, to the intended person. and how that intended person is handling those data. And that's where we have identified 3 solutions. The Seclore, the Titus, which does the data discovery, which enforces the user as to have a classification mark, and the classification can be validated based on the organization policy. Next comes the data protection in terms of a McAfee solution, where I can have an endpoint control or an email control or a web control, as well as through the CASB solution, I can also check how the content has been transferred to the cloud platform. And the last piece of the solution is with the way how the data can be securely transmitted and tracked. That's where we bring up with the solution with the Seclore IRM, so that the entire data flow is being managed, it has been identified, classified, protected, and you are able to send it across, and it is getting tracked. So as I said earlier, this is based on the holistic approach, covering the all the aspect on how the data has to be protected. Can you go to the next slide? As I mentioned earlier, typical problem with comes with a point solution is like there is no kind of an integration. So that's one of the advantage what we bring with this combination of solution is to have an integrated approach. So while data classification is done, that information is fed into the McAfee solution, so that you have one console for viewing the alerts and the monitoring things. And with the data protection, the how the data is getting protected in various ways, it can also be seen as a single management console. On top of that, when I put an encryption solution or an IRM solution, typical challenge the client faces is all my traffic, all my data is getting encrypted. Will my existing controls can still work? That's where the integration can be looked into within the McAfee and Seclore, where I can have a flexibility of encrypting selected traffic based on the headers, and the data is not entirely encrypted, but still the control has been kept in place. Now that we have seen the high level architecture, let's look at how the individual solution works, starting with data classification. Subbu?
Yeah. Hi. Here. Thanks, Balaji. Thanks for the great summary and the overview of what we are going to talk today. So, these are the 3. First of all, I hope I'm audible, right? Audio is clear.
Yes, Subbu, you are.
Okay, great. So the 3 fundamental blocks of any data protection program is basically understanding what data are we dealing with. And that starts with basically the identity of the data. Now, when you talk about identity of the data, there are different types of data that an organization would have. Something which is an intellectual property, something which is a PII, something which is of a concern from a confidentiality perspective, something which can be shared outside. And all these are different types of unstructured data that we have in the organization. We may have it in probably SharePoint, we may have it in Dropbox, we may have it in a file server, or every user is basically also creating such data day in and day out. Every day people are creating new files. So it is data at rest as well as data that is getting created each and every day. And this needs to be identified. The reason why we need to identify it properly is unless and until we identify, we can't bucket it. We can't understand, okay, this is confidential, this is restricted, this is sensitive. And when that is not done, it is very difficult to protect. Now let's forget data protection for a minute. Let's just understand how it works in a normal life. Now, if I, as a visitor, I come to your office and there is a process at the security, the reception, right, where your security team would ask me some questions. What is he trying to do? The security guard there is trying to understand, or the receptionist is trying to understand or identify me as a person. Who am I? Okay, so there are some questions. Who am I? I say, okay, I'm Subbu. Okay, show me your card. That is probably my identity card. Then, okay, let's check your bag. So the bag is checked. So what is happening at that point is identity is established for me as a person. And there are various techniques used. Sometimes it is a conversation. Sometimes it's a photograph that is being clicked. Sometimes it's a back scan which is being done. And all these different methods are basically used so that the identity established for the data is as accurate as possible. And once that is done, been given a tag. Okay, now you are a visitor, maybe a red tag, something like that. That is basically the classification stage. And when you do identification and classification correctly, what happens after that is just the protection layer, which is the third layer, basically, not identify as it is written here. So basically the third layer, the protection layer. So in the protection layer, what happens is you have McAfee, Seclore, tools which can take actions. And like in the real world example, you have different doors, you have access control. And depending on what access I get, in terms of the card or the access card, I can access a specific room or I cannot access a specific room. I can go into a visitor room, but not into a data center. So that is what changes, and those controls get pretty much simplified. And these controls get simplified because identity is established correctly and classification is done. Now imagine being able to do that in the data, interacting with the user, asking the user whether this data is sensitive or not, automatically using engines within the tool like the keywords, regular expressions, machine learning engine to validate what the user is saying, whether it is really sensitive or it is public or what type of data it is, and then classifying it. Once you classify, then enforcing all the controls. Next slide, please. We're just trying to double click and understand how do we actually identify. Now, if you look at some document, like say this mortgage loan agreement. Now, this is a document which contains different types of data. It has some PII, it has PCI content, it has social security number, it has address, date of birth, so a lot of parameters which are quite sensitive. Now, what we do is we first of all identify this. Now, we can identify using technology. We can identify even by seeking the user's input. We can even do both in combination. Now, once you understand what this document is all about, you identify, you can then understand how to handle this information and guide not only other people, but all solutions to handle this data. So what is happening here is we are understanding these parameters and putting that value into the metadata of the file, or basically the file property. And what you see on the left hand side is basically just a zoomed version of that. And each of these fields which you see in the metadata now tells you something about what this document is all about and how it is supposed to be handled. So it says loan agreement. So you know how a loan agreement document is to be handled. Now, when I say you know, the solutions know how to handle it. A backup solution knows that a loan agreement document is to be backed up separately. A DLP knows that a loan agreement document needs to be allowed to be sent somewhere or not allowed to be sent somewhere. If you look at a retention period, a Seclore solution understands that yes, I need to put an IRM rights on this and ensure that the file is retained till this date with appropriate encryption. A McAfee DLP or a CASB knows that the file is classified as confidential and a customer confidential. So I need to ensure that when this file is going outside, especially to cloud or to some public domains, I'll block it. But if it is going to a regulator or some authorized third party, I will allow it. So what is happening here is each and every variable within the metadata is something which gives additional context to the technologies which protect data, which is DLP, CASB, IRM. Next slide, please. Yeah. So what we are fundamentally doing here is we are identifying, as I said, we use different techniques, maybe user inputs, maybe, or technology which is built in the solution, cover data which is getting created every day, and also data which is already created and lying in your environment. Once we do that, the additional context that we gather out of this analysis is put as metadata value into those files. And the best part is this makes integration also very simple, because a McAfee and a Seclore solution can read this data that we enter into the metadata and seamlessly enforce policies on that file. Whether it is moving to cloud, whether it needs to be protected till a given period of time, whether you need to exercise rights before it reaches some third-party recipient. So you can actually optimize all the security investments that you have today and also the ones that you would make going forward. So what happens here is fundamentally you are orchestrating the entire data protection like you do it in the physical security and automating it. That's it from me. I think I would hand it over to McAfee now to talk more about how the protection is enforced once identity to the data is established and it is classified. Thank you.
Thank you, Subbu. Hi, everyone. This is Vamsi again. Good background laid by Murtuza at the beginning, and they were establishing why a cohesive and a comprehensive approach to data is very important from a protection perspective. Subbu gave us a peek of understanding your data, identifying what is your critical data, and taking on from there, once you've identified what are some of the key aspects of making sure that you always keep your data secure. How do you always ensure that there is the right set of eyes looking at that kind of data, and if that data is leaving the organization or going into the hands of people that it necessarily should not. So with that perspective, you look at how McAfee approaches this particular data protection problem. It is about how do you protect that data wherever it resides. And if you take the current context where people are working from home, people are going to work in the future a lot more from different places, remote working is going to be the norm. It's going to be evident that people will access sensitive data that is important for them to converse with their customers, their own IP. If they're a development organization, if they build some of the IP, all of that is going to happen from remote locations, and you don't have the same kind of liberty that you would if you were staying within 4 doors of your own office environment to protect your data both physically and from an IT perspective. And that's where the whole protecting data wherever it resides actually comes in. Now, protecting the data is one part, but more importantly, understanding the policy configuration. How do you understand users and independent business units within this own organization looks at data, what is important for each different department? Understanding that is the first key aspect of it, right? So you'd have an HR department of an organization which would have everything related to their employees. The finance department may have everything about invoicing, payouts, and employee salaries, and so on. So understanding the context of data, once you understand and classifying that data to Subbu's point, and then applying the right kind of protection for data, whether it is on the endpoints, that's the devices. It could be some of the modern devices that we're speaking about, your mobile phones or tablets, or even thin clients as we look at going forward. And that's the one aspect. The device has the data which is residing on it. The other aspect is people receive and send data. Where do they receive and send that data from? A lot of data is received these days in the form of emails, attachments that come in through emails. You may be speaking with your suppliers, with your customers, with your partners. A lot of that data comes in through emails. And invariably, we also receive a lot of email when we go to websites and we download some stuff from there. So we may be going to a file sharing website. I may be going to a website where I'm going to participate in a public auction where I have to upload some documents. And when I'm doing so, am I violating any of my data policies from an organization's sensitivity perspective? And if I am, what is the process of ensuring that that data is protected? Am I putting the right kind of policies? Am I preventing a wrong upload, which may happen by intent or by mistake? And how do you then take care of such kind of workflows when it comes to data perspective? There's also other means of data that can leave the organization. Classic cases could be somebody just plugging in a USB into your device and trying to copy some data from a specific file or folder. You may have environments where there's a bunch of shared PCs and shared devices and multiple people log in. So how do you protect independent shares and different aspects of your own folders from data so that's not accessible with others? So all of that needs to be borne in mind when you're coming with a comprehensive data protection strategy. So that's where the whole protect data wherever it resides actually comes in. And of late, when we speak about the new norm from a remote work perspective, increasingly there are cloud services and cloud-based applications. It could be in the form of collaborative services, Office 365s, the Dropboxes, or so on. Or you may be consuming a SaaS service simply for your own ticket management system, and that ticket management system would ask you to upload data related to your endpoint device. It could ask you to upload a document to say that, to substantiate the ticket that you've raised. There's so many different ways the data gets exchanged to users who may or may not need access to that. So all of that defines your data protection strategy. And that's where the multi-environment data control actually comes in. Some of the key points that you need to bear in mind is, how do I prevent data leak from multiple loss vectors, email, web that we just spoke about, network, etc. There could be a malicious insider. You could have a potential employee who's been asked to leave, or there could be a potential employee who's leaving for joining a competition, and it's possible that they may want to take some key data away. And that is the insider threat for a data perspective. So how do you look at that? How are some of the automatic controls like behavioral analytics? How does that come in? How does that play a role in terms of preventing data from leaving your organization? And of course, some sort of remediation controls. Like if I'm sending my data and it is authorized data, the person should have access to it, but it has to be access that is given to a person only in a time-bound manner. The access to that data should be revoked in say 3 days from now, or it should only reach a specific user and only that particular user, when he opens it with his email ID or something, should actually decrypt the data. A lot of different possibilities that are possible, and that's where the combination of the platform players comes together. That's the power of data protection from McAfee, the classification and the visibility of data that Titus brings in, and of course the subsequent part from an overall management of that particular data that Seclore brings us. It's not just that. Some of the other things that a comprehensive and a complete data protection view gives you is, how do you actually take that leap of faith and start adopting the newer technologies from a time to market perspective. One of the things that inhibits any organization from being adaptive to newer controls and newer forms of working is because they're not very confident of their existing data strategies helping them from that adoption perspective. So understanding your data and having a comprehensive policy, a comprehensive strategy really helps from that point of view as well. If you could move to the next slide, please. So if you look at what this is, traditionally how are these problems being solved? If you look at any organization, there would be different teams managing different this, while there are business owners that you'd have typically from a data perspective. Like I said, the finance guys knows best what is the most important data that they have. The HR people know best what is the most important data that they have, while a sales team will have a completely different view of what is the most important data for them, customer contacts and all of that. So all of this brings in a need for us to understand the life cycle of data. What happens since the data arrives in an organization, and if it has to leave for authenticated purposes, then who does it go to? All of that. Understanding the life cycle of that is very, very important, and having a security strategy for that data across that entire spectrum makes for a very, very good strategy around that. And more importantly, from a manageability perspective, I could be the same user. I could be a user as an employee. I have my own finance information. I have my own salary information. I belong to the organization, so I also work with the HR teams. I'm in sales, so I have access to a lot of sales related data. The journey for a user is not just specific to an individual department. The department will have their own priorities, but if you look at the user implication of data, it traverses through different departments. So it's important to understand the life cycle of that data, and then having the visibility to manage it. And that's where a centralized management and visibility as well as governance framework actually comes into the whole picture. So whether I access it from my mobile phone or from my desktop, or even from remote browsing that I do from a friend's laptop, my data should always be protected, and it should always remain within the boundaries of what the organization perceives it in a virtual manner. So there shouldn't be a need to switch different consoles to view incidents and generate reports. It should also aid from an audit and a regulatory perspective, because when somebody comes and looks at it, hey, this person seems to have been an insider and he stole the information related to all the sales data, but hey, he doesn't have access to the sales data. How did he get access to that? It's important for that cohesive view. It's important for that single pane of glass to be able to understand that entire data in context. And that's where some of the additional helps also actually come in. And before finally wrapping up from my perspective, the other thing that I also see increasingly these days is more organizations, as they adopt remote cloud, as there's adoption of newer cloud instances from an environment perspective, or from cloud applications from an application perspective, there's a need for providing seamless access to that data. So there's also a very interesting phenomenon in terms of cloud as a perspective, the data as a perspective, and the access from that device to the cloud increasingly coming together. That's where McAfee is really making a lot of new innovative progress on what we call as the unified cloud edge. And that's the beauty of bringing the device and the cloud from a data context together, including the access part of it. And that helps you define a very comprehensive data security strategy. If we can move to the next slide, please. And I just wanted to, kind of summarize how classification and data protection comes together in this context. Titus and McAfee, how did they come together? Before I have my colleague Hidajit speak about from a data management and an information rights management perspective, is you've got to look at a comprehensive and a singular way of having visibility of your data, and then kind of categorizing that data into different classifications. Is that internal? Is that publicly shareable? How do you do that? Is that based on keywords or some machine learning, to what Subbu previously spoke to us about? Understanding the risk of each of that data element. What happens if this data goes out from the organization? Will that have some sort of a negative impact? And essentially sharing that and also maintaining that life cycle of data is where actually helps you come up with a very comprehensive data security strategy. It enhances your overall adoption from a data protection as well as from a cloud services perspective. So I'd like to pass it on now to Hidajit, who will speak about the rights management, in fact the data management part of it, and how do you complete that life cycle of data. Over to you, Hidajit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vamsi. The next slide, please. Right. So the various technologies that the enterprises adopt or deploy while on their data-centric security journey is means to an end. The end objective being to protect the organization's crown jewels. And this is what the core capability of the Seclore rights management platform is. Now, taking an analogy from the current situation, as we step out of our house, we protect or secure ourselves in different layers, like wearing a mask or a face shield, so that we are safe from external threats. Now, similarly, as the data leaves its home, and in case of data, this home being a user's endpoint or a file server, a cloud application or a cloud repository like SharePoint, OneDrive, or is emailed, as it moves internally or externally, rights management protects it from these unforeseen threats. The rights management protection that Seclore offer is an answer to these four key questions: who, what, when, and where, or the 4 Ws. The first being who. The rights individual or a group of individuals who should have access to this information post protection. That is, are you the right individual who should be accessing this file or email? So these identities are typically federated using our identity and access management framework from the existing repositories like Active Directory, LDAP, or WebSSO solutions like Ping, Okta, etc. in case organizations have those. And if you are the right who, what can you do with that information? Are you a collaborator who just needs to maybe view the file, or are you also supposed to edit it? Are you allowed to copy the contents from this protected document at all? And in case yes, allowed to copy from a protected to another protected file only. Now, other granular controls also include ability to prevent activities like screen grab, allow users to share information, and also allow users to work offline in case they are not connected to internet and still want to view or access a Seclore protected file. The third W is when. Now, the relationship between the two organizations, individuals, can change over a period of time, and so should the access to the collaborated information. So we actually time-bound access to this data to a particular date and time or days from access. So a good use case of this technology could be, for example, mergers and acquisition. Organization shares a due diligence document with financials data with its external auditors and would want this access to be automatically withdrawn or must not be available post the due diligence activities over. So you can do that with the when piece. Last but not the least, with where, we provide location-based controls on protected data and can lock the file to maybe a geo or to a device. Now, these controls are granular, going way beyond file encryption, identification, tagging, or detection for that matter. The rights control a file even while it is being worked upon, stay with the file whenever it travels, and can be remotely modified or revoked in the event that the partnership ends or an employee leaves. Now, as we move to the next slide, we will see that the other key capability of rights management is the ability to report back to the enterprise the detailed audit of their secure data sets for regulatory and compliance reasons. Now, with the new laws like our own data protection bill, which will be becoming law soon, there is a requirement enforced on data fiduciaries that to not only restricted access to the citizens' PII, but also keep a track on what is happening to that, who is using this information, and what actions they are doing. Now, with Seclore data-centric audits, we give a very detailed insight into all of these through the data's entire life cycle. Like we see here, we are tracking authorized and unauthorized activities. I can know when a person tried to do an unauthorized edit or print to a file, and when reviewed, these activities can give us more insights, primarily to the owner of this information, that either the user needs more rights because he's trying to work on this protected information, or in case I find this malicious, I can go back and totally revoke the user's access. Now, the details can get more granular. We protect using the 4 Ws, as we saw in the previous slide. We also track those 4 Ws. For example, details like a laptop or mobile, who is accessing this, the location of the file, the geo details of the device, among other things. And we also provide a lot of trend analysis to the organization admins for a more deeper look into these unauthorized or high risk activities happening on the organization's data as well. And as we move to the next slide. Next slide, please. We'll see how Seclore rights management can easily automate the process of data protection with minimal or no user intervention. Now, firstly, for the data at the endpoint. At the endpoint, as you see here, as the user creates a document, the same can be tagged by Titus, and through our integration with Titus, it can then be protected or secured automatically. Alternately, McAfee DLP can scan based on these classification tags, keywords, patterns, etc. And then these policies as an action can call Seclore rights management and protect this document. So once protected, no matter where this document travels, it cannot be accessible by unauthorized recipients of information. Next slide, please. Now, we can also extend the capability of data protection to emails as well. A user creates an email as usual, maybe adds an attachment to the email and sends this email out. Now, in case not enforced, the email can go out as unclassified. And in this case, a McAfee component will scan this email and attachments, and in case of any policy violation, adds an X header. In case of a classified email by Titus, this email can also be, the X header can also be added by Titus. The email then goes through the email infra as usual. It doesn't matter whether it's an on-premise infrastructure or a cloud email solution, or email is being sent from an iPad or mobile or a laptop. The Seclore email auto protector will read these X headers and protect this email. So no user intervention or dependence here. And the recipients now receive a Seclore protected email, including the email body as well as the attachments. Next slide, please. And the last integration touch point is from a cloud perspective. With work from home, enterprises have seen a very steep surge in cloud application adoptions. Now, more and more cloud services like Salesforce, SharePoint Online, O365 or Google, etc., are being used across the enterprise to share or collaborate information. And the concern now the enterprises have is that when data is being extracted out of these cloud applications or repositories, used or shared externally or accessed from uncontrolled network or devices, how should they restrict access to this information, and more importantly, also track what is happening to this information? Now, with the integration with the McAfee's Envision platform, as the file is classified or otherwise uploaded to these cloud platforms, the McAfee Envision, through its integration with Seclore rights management, can identify this information and protect it. So this gives enterprises a great sense of comfort that their sensitive data is not only safe in these cloud applications, it also provides them more confidence that the documents once downloaded from these cloud repositories or applications is also protected and secure. Next slide, please. Now let's look at what difference does Seclore bring to this whole ecosystem. Next slide, please. Right. The previous one. Thank you. So the rights management platform, can help accelerate and optimize the DLP deployments. So there are typical business rules that are created as part of this. What do we move, what do we stop, or quarantine, etc. And this whole process usually involves a lot of trial by error, with endless cycles of testing. So the easy answer here is just Seclore it. And in all those lax areas where we just make sure that the information is going out protected. So it doesn't matter, whether you don't necessarily need to block it, and you need not worry about false positive and all. Now, organizations also tend to spend a lot of time on administration of the DLP systems. But once the data is secured, it can also optimize the DLP administration, as there are now less false positives or less exceptions there to deal with. Now, from a classification solution for the key tags, the files can be protected the moment they are classified, thus adding an additional layer of security that travels along with the document or email, and thus enhancing the capability of classification solution that goes way beyond tagging, right? And with the combination of being able to accelerate the deployments and administer it quickly, the organization can also drive a quick ROI on their investment by just adding Seclore to the whole mix. Now with that, I turn it back to Murtaza to summarize what the audience has heard today, and also how they should be going about this. Over to you, Murtaza.
So thank you. I think it is an interesting discussion that we had. And I'll just summarize in next 2 minutes. Is to what we are talking here is, in order to have the data protection strategy, we need to have the entire platform, which starts from identifying the data, classifying it into an appropriate classification level, apply protection to it, and then proper apply the rights management, so that even if it is moving around or somebody is working on it, the authorization and the rights management kicks in. So even if the data is lost, nobody, unauthorized people cannot have an access to it. So wherever the data goes, it remains secure in entirety. So what I've understood is that it requires the entire platform, right, to do this, because there are different technologies required to do different things, right? Like what it is mentioned here, right? In the ecosystem, when an employee creates a document or sends an email, we need Titus to either automatically classify it or give an option to the user to classify it based on what he's creating as a document or an email. And then it goes to McAfee for applying relevant policy based on the classification, whether it is allowed to be shared, not shared, and stuff like that. And then Seclore puts a rights management around it, so that when it moves or when it goes out of the boundaries, it is protected, and it requires proper authorization to read it or open it or change it and stuff like that. And all together, we will need an aspect of design, implementation, and integration, because the information flows from one tool to another tool, and a cohesive security context-based security application can be arrived using this platform. So that's what I have understood. One most important thing also I have understood out of this entire discussion, and I want to summarize that, is that these solutions are independent of each other also, right? So there is no start way that, from where we can start and which is to be implemented first. Whatever is available, the other solutions can be deployed and integrated among themselves, and we can start from wherever the pain points are. If the current issue that the client has in its strategy in terms of applying or moving files with proper rights management on it, Seclore can be the first project. Or there is a proper requirement of controlling the movement of data, McAfee can be the first project. Or is it, there is a lot of data which is lying unclassified in the system, and that is the primary concern, then Titus can become the first project in the entire ecosystem. So I think this is good, and I think this gives an entire comprehensive end-to-end data protection, whether the data is in store, whether the store is the end user laptop or his mobile devices or his Dropbox or cloud storage. The data remains there secure, and when he is processing, he requires a valid authorization and authentication as per the organization business policy requirement to change it. And when he sends it out, it requires proper authorization and policies to send it to relevant people who are required or need to know on the data. So I think that summarize the entire protection strategy, and that also put forward the needs of a platform required to do all these three different tasks, which is supposed to be done on any data available at any place across the infrastructure. So that's about it. I have we move to question and answer. I would urge the participant to give us the question through the chat panels. I have certain question already available in the chat panel, which I want to start asking this to the panelists, and please let me know if there are more questions on that. So I will ask them one by one. So quickly, just want to ask the first question to Subbu. There are currently a lot of investment that organization has done in terms of data protection and stuff like that. So how do you mentioned about optimizing the data protection investment? How do we do that if we already have certain investments done, and how do we optimize that investments?
Yeah, that's a great question, Murtuza. So if you look at what happens, every organization has taken some initiatives towards data protection. They may probably have an endpoint DLP looking at a CASB, or like you just mentioned, are in different stages. They would probably have some controls, maybe looking at IRM, or maybe backup is already there and they want to get into archival and stuff like that. So different stages. Now, it is important that you have a framework which is extensible in the sense that it, of course, helps you orchestrate the solutions that you already have, and is also ready to deal with solutions which you may adopt in future. And that can be done only if you adopt a open framework. And that's what we do at Titus. So what we do at Titus is we identify the document using various techniques, and then we classify. Now, when we classify, what we are doing is we are basically adding values to the metadata of the file. And metadata is an absolutely open framework. And so a DLP can read it, a CASB can read it, an IRM can read it, a backup solution can read it. So if an organization has none of the data protection technologies, they may have a backup solution. So the backup solution can leverage it. Now, tomorrow they are looking at adopting CASB. The CASB can leverage it. An IRM solution, and that can leverage it. So basically, as the organization moves towards greater maturity in terms of data protection technologies and its adoption, the Titus metadata and the ecosystem which they have built in terms of identifying and classifying files will be extensible and will remain valid throughout that journey.
So a subsequent question to that, Subbu, that is that is it difficult, or is it transparent to classify the data which is getting created? I believe you already spoke in the slide, but what about historical data lying in the infrastructure? Do we have certain discovery methods which can automatically help us classify the historical data as per the policies that we want to set?
Surely, Murtaza. Again, a great question. Yes, we can help you deal with both data that is getting created and the data which is already created, whether it is lying in a file server, whether it is lying in OneDrive, Dropbox. We can take a full, we can scan those repositories, get a full inventory of those files, and then based on various policies which can be based on content, file attributes like owner, age, content of the file like specific keywords or PCI content, or a combination of these attributes and content, you can classify those files. So the inventory, classification, and even remediation in terms of moving or copying those files would be absolutely possible. So basically a platform which will help organizations deal with data at creation as well as data at rest.
Okay, so that leads to another question which I want to ask Vamsi from McAfee here, that how do we see the data protection evolving in increasing remote working scenarios? Right, nowadays people are working remote. The entire modalities of working, the end user connections and end user connecting to the data is changed. So how it will evolve in a remote working scenario.
Sure. Thanks, Murtuza. I think, we traditionally, when people are looking at data protection and you're looking at scanning your repositories, identifying sensitive content and building a strategy around that, I think we're making rapid progress around that. However, what this remote working has done at mass scale is a lot of this cloud native data that is being built, and that kind of creates a bunch of gaps, right? So for example, you were in an organization and you were working traditionally with your data centers and all of your applications internally. There were a bunch of controls that were there to help you identify, classify, and protect that data. But as new data is being created directly on the fly, you take a SaaS application and you build it directly in the cloud, and you have data that is created directly in the cloud from an unmanaged device. How are you looking at data from that perspective? And therein comes in the the overall visibility and a complete data protection view. And that's how I think the data protection strategies are evolving. That the second thing is, in India specifically, from a regulatory perspective, there's a lot of new implications. Like, you could be in any industry, but as long as you're dealing with individuals, there's loss related to privacy, there's loss related to something else. It could be as simple a thing as you may be tying up with a payment gateway, and somebody comes and transacts on your business and buys something from your website. If you're an e-commerce company, or if you're a bank, you transact online, and all of this has a lot of implications from a data privacy, data security, and all of that. So it's also important for people to start looking at that data from that context of the cloud native data that is being built, the cloud native visibility of data, and how do you then have a strategy for security around that. I think that's the need of the hour in terms of looking at data very comprehensively, and also look at cloud native data so that it can be protected directly at the edge, as we call it, because they're no longer going to bring that data into your data center to have your traditional data protection controls. So while DLPs on the endpoint and network, and DLP for email and DLP for clouds remain, there will be still certain gaps that are created for cloud native data in these remote scenarios, and protecting that and closing those gaps is very, very important.
One of the questions that I've got, from the participant here is, does Titus support dynamic policies according to organization, which is retail, healthcare, etc.? So Subbu, can you just?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. We have a very flexible policy framework which works on an event, condition, and an action framework, and that basically allows organization to build policies as per their industry industry. Of course, there are specific templates also available within the solution, but it can be highly customized in terms of creating policies the way an organization needs it, and suitable for different use cases, for different departments within their organization. Like a finance team can have a different policy, an HR team can have a different policy. Someone would get a prompt for classification, someone would not get a prompt for classification. In some cases can do both. So it's highly flexible engine which lets you create policies specific to content, specific to department, specific to users and industry.
Okay, so no, Indrajit, I just got a question here which says that you spoke about a data protection bill. How does the solution help comply with various data protection regulation requirements that are available when a client is working globally?
Right. So we've seen a lot of regulatory compliances or regulations coming in, and if you see for most of them, the underlying focus is data. So be it GDPR, the underlying focus is on data, or be it our own personal data and privacy bill, which is going to be a law soon. So the underlying need or protection that wants to be implemented is primarily around how to safeguard citizens' data or citizens' PII information. Now, what Seclore can offer to help here is that the core focus of rights management is to protect or secure information from authorized or unauthorized access, right? And what the regulations are primarily driving here is that the information, when it is in the possession of the organization, and it is irrespective of industries, irrespective of verticals, geographies for that matter, when the organizations are in possession of the information which is PIR related information of, for example, Indian citizens or European citizens for GDPR, the access of those information should be restricted so that only certain key people who are supposed to have access to this information are able to view it or work on this information. And more importantly, it should give organizations a key or a detailed audit in terms of what is happening to this information, who is using it, who is consuming it. And rights management is the right platform here in terms of when the information gets protected or secured, and whether it is being shared or for the information also that is coming in inside the organization. Once it is secured or protected, we not only make sure that it is protected from unauthorized access, but we give a complete view to the organization of what is happening to this data. Right, so it helps in dealing with a lot of regulatory or compliance framework, which put the onus on the organizations to make sure that the data is being securely viewed and accessed. And more importantly, there is right to forget, which essentially is if the individual wants that the organization should not have access to this information or his private information, then there should be flexibility in the solution itself to make sure that the organization no longer is in possession of that data. In case they already have the possession of the data, they should be making sure that this information is no longer accessible. So all those regulatory requirements can be fulfilled by integration of different technologies.
Okay. So one of the questions that I see is, referring to the system integrator Deva. This is related to you. In terms of deploying this platform, what role client has to play? What prerequisites are required from the client side so that integration of this entire platform is done with an objective or the outcome that is shown here in this presentation is achieved?
Yeah, that's the most important question, Murtaza. See, if you look at while data protection solutions has been there for quite some time, the benefit of those has not been achieved. The primary reason goes in terms of what data to be protected. With the solutions what we discuss, we'll be able to help the organization to identify what kind of a data goes, provide a visibility. But end of the day, there is going to be something which is unique to the organization. And that's where an organization has to help in identifying the visibility which is provided. The organization has to work together to understand, to analyze them and say that this is critical, and based on that the protection controls can be implemented so that the data protection works as intended.
Okay. So good, thanks. So I think what you are saying is that the participation of the organization, as Hirdejit also said, right, the onus of the compliance is with the client himself, and the participation in terms of what information can be classified, and what policies are need to be applied. The onus still remains with the client. Tool is a tool, and that needs to be configured with that information which comes from the client themselves. Okay, so one more question I have. I'm sure that we are running out of the time. I'm taking this last question. What we will do is all the remaining questions we will create an FAQ and send it to all the participants so that they have the answers to their questions. I can only take few questions barring the time that we have. I will take one last question. Any one of you can answer. I think it's a tricky question and I want to take this tricky question. The question says that in work from home environment, how cyber resiliency give cost effective better solution to form access mechanism to office client, server, cloud, all open source remote access tools to block access and execute through VPN or your tools. As I've understood, this tool is questioning the cost of the entire platform versus the open source tool available to do these kind of stuff. Anyone wants to?
Let me take a stab at it, Murtuza Vamsi.
Yeah.
See, I think the it kind of, and I can draw parallels. Maybe I'm just interpreting it based on what I was previously speaking, and happy to elaborate further offline with this question. The thing is, in this work from home environment or remote working, as I call it, where you can work from anywhere, it's important for a bunch of technologies to come together, right? So it's not just about data, but essentially you're looking at users, the access, the regulatory implications, data protection, of course, and the data lifecycle. And then how do you effectively come up with a comprehensive security strategy? Now we're going beyond data security as a strategy, but effectively looking at security as an overall strategy. Because traditionally, a lot of this was done by backhauling traffic back into organizations' data centers, right? Wherein, the specific context of VPN comes up. But in this new world, if you're still trying to bring in, hundreds of gigabytes of simultaneous data back through VPN gateways and then route it back to the internet through your corporate data centers, I think it's a very, very archaic way of looking at security architecture. I think it's very important for us to adopt the new normal and break things out directly to the internet. So breaking it out to the internet and then coming up with a security strategy accordingly, right? So build that out from the device, from the access, from the data, from the threat, applications which are hosted on the cloud, applications which are consumed as SaaS, and ultimately applications which are also in your data center. How do you, confidently expose them to be consumed over the internet? I think it is a very comprehensive security architecture conversation, and it is the reality of the world. And I think increasingly you'll see culmination, like in the case of McAfee, like we said, from a data protection. Well, we have all the esteemed partners and building a platform. It's also important for us to bring in some web controls, like the secure web gateway capabilities into that context. It's also important for us to bring in device posture check capabilities into the context, and then provide contextual access to the device, to the user, etc., while maintaining data sanctity at any point in time. It's a very comprehensive answer, of course, but I love the question. I think it is very, very relevant in the current context, and we should try and elaborate that in an offline manner. I'll pick that up. That's my view on this.
Thanks, Vanshi, and thanks everyone. I think I will just summarize with one statement saying that in this new normal where data is being accessed from everywhere, it is evident that we need to keep the end user experience in terms of access of this data as as normal as possible. And to do that, keeping security in mind, we will have to have a platform approach that we have spoken, which integrates security for data at multiple layers in a central single managed ecosystem. And that is why this integration and a platform approach is required. So thank you, Deva, thank you, Subbu, thank you, Vamsi, thank you, Hirdijit, for this wonderful insight on data protection, cyber resiliency. Thanks for the time. Thank you to all the attendees who have taken out time and attending this webinar. As a follow-up, we will create the answers to these questions that you have submitted as an FAQ document and circulate to all the attendees. Thank you once again. Stay safe. Stay in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.